So if you want total users of Hyperliquid over time or of Uniswap over time, you can't do a query like that to the blockchain. Dune's mission, is to make crypto data accessible.
Where do you think the industry is? How has the usage of data changed over time?
Dune analytics tool will end up being driven by English. But I think it's fair to say that the interest in on-chain data is just higher than ever.
Welcome to the Deco podcast, where we bring you stories from founders and investors in Web3. Before we get started, this is not a financial or legal advice. It's just a conversation about things we find interesting in Web3. Views expressed are our own personal opinions. Deco members or guests appearing on the show may have positions on assets they talk about. All right, another episode. We have Mats Olsen, who's the CTO and co-founder at Dune. I guess if you're in crypto for quite some time, one of the data companies that you've definitely come across is Dune. So, Mats, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here. Yeah, been in crypto since 2017 now, and Dune has existed since 2018. So it's been a while.
So you spent like 1 year in crypto and started Dune. Is that?
Essentially, yeah. So while working a corporate job, got sort of pilled on investing in ICOs through a colleague, essentially. And that colleague turned out to become the CEO of Nansen, so Alexander. So Alex and I are close friends from before and now run two prominent data companies in crypto. But yeah, we got into investing in ICOs and got super interested in what was behind everything. Lost a bunch of money, obviously, over New Year's, and then quit my job and started working on Dune.
Okay, so I want to understand how Dune has evolved since then. I believe that it were like two of you who started in Oslo, and now I don't know what the headcount is, but I guess it's more than 100 now.
We're about 60 people, but yeah.
Okay. Okay, so how has it changed? Like, what was the focus then? What is the focus now? And how have you guys navigated like the last 7 years? Yeah.
Yeah. So in one way, it's not too different today from what it was. And in another way, it's very, very different. So we started out back then by essentially leaning on our experience from like prototyping apps on chain. So we were building on test nets and really struggled to understand how to get data. And so I used to work as a data scientist. So I was really interested in this concept of the blockchain as a database and quickly realized that it's write optimized. You can't really read any data from it except like point lookups. So that was really the basis the thought that spawned Dune. So there needs to be a way for builders like myself and others to like read aggregate data from the chain. So in the beginning, we just started doing that. We just started in what we today call indexing data from the chain. I think we were the first ones to come out with like large scale decoding of data. So we took in ABIs and we could automatically translate bytecodes to typed columns that developers could recognize. And already in like end of 2018, I think we had our first like the app builders become customers, and they just essentially queried data that we had in our Postgres database. And then the pivotal moment I think came in 2019 when we decided that, one of the groundbreaking things of Ethereum and crypto at that time was that all this data on this database, that's called the blockchain, is publicly legible. You can go to Etherscan and read it, and nobody can stop you from doing that. So instead of trying to build like a pure closed source company around an open data set, we wanted to turn it around and build an open company on top of the open data set. And that's what most people know about Dune today. You go to Dune.com and you see essentially user-generated content. Thousands of community members worldwide contribute to create dashboards on everything from, Hyperliquid to stable coins to whatever's hot in crypto at any given time. And so that was sort of the pivotal moment that I think made Dune what it is today. But deep down, we still do the same thing. We fetch the data from the blockchain and make it accessible to people.
Just that it's more chains and more people.
More chains, more people, and the product obviously changed as well, being very single player focused initially to being more multiplayer focused. So when you go to Dune.com today, the interesting thing is like a pure traditional SaaS don't let like users from say company A and company B interact with each other unless they really want to. Whereas on Dune, the default mode is that you're sort of dropped into this pool of people from the world who all work together indirectly to sort of push the space forward. So it's sort of like a little bit of a novel way it works, I'd say.
So, right since the beginning, you had chosen this path of user generated content, right? Like, how do you incentivize so many users to make sure that they come to Dune and generate this data? That is part one. And secondly, how do you ensure that the quality of data remains consistent across the board? I mean, when someone says that this is a chart for, let's say, number of transactions on Solana that are going through a G2 bundle, how does someone like me who doesn't understand Dune know that that is what exactly the chart is?
Yeah. So on the first point, so we don't really incentivize anyone to show up to Dune, right? It's sort of this inherent incentivization that has become prevalent in crypto where like people who post and share good data and dashboards sort of build up a following and become sort of influencers of themselves. So we actively don't like incentivize through any means really the creation of dashboards. We sometimes work with wizards and in conjunction with clients to create tailored reports and dashboards. But most of the time, everything you see on Dune is sort of purely organic. And as with any user-generated content platform, it is really tricky to know if, this dashboard is 100% correct. In fact, that's really tricky anywhere. And I'd argue that it's actually maybe a little bit easier on Dune than, let's say, a fully closed sourced solution, because on Dune, you yourself or someone or someone on Twitter can actually go and check the source. So somebody can go and see the underlying query. They can go and inspect all the data sets. They can look at every single row that feeds into a dashboard if they so would like to do so. So the fact that it's possible to say, no, if this is quality data or not, I think is the key difference. That doesn't mean that everything you see is quality, not on Dune, not on any sort of analytics website, but we do our best at least to give people the tools to do that.
Yeah, that's fair. Because end of the day, when something is a black box, you don't really know whether that is correct or not, and there's no way to verify. At least here, you know the SQL query, and even if you don't understand, someone you know might. And like I think in the age of ChatGPT, even that becomes an easier verification, right? So
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think one of the things our community really asks for a lot of the time is more sort of collaborative features and things like community notes that X has, comments, etc., so that people can really tag when something is or ask questions when they don't understand why a certain dashboard was done in a certain way. We haven't really built much in that direction because I think we've relied more on, let's say, the social graph of X or Farcaster or even on Telegram between wizards and groups to do this sort of self-moderation. But yeah, it's interesting you bring up AI because I think that could play a huge role in the future in verifying both data and dashboards.
and like one more point along the lines of community. So has the focus gone like a little bit beyond analytics, and will Wizard still be the priority for Dune? Like, how is that changing right now?
Yeah, that's a timely question. So I think when Dune sort of exploded into crypto, so to speak, that was during DeFi summer in 2020. Like people were onboarding onto Dune, building dashboards, as quickly as new DeFi protocols were created. And so like we were just focused on this like organic growth that was happening, this viral loop of people interested in DeFi coming into the space, signing up to Dune, building dashboards, this raw curiosity that the space had. So for a long time, we were just trying to keep up and essentially like have a platform that scales with, everybody interested in crypto. Over time, obviously, Dune is a company. And so we created things like pricing plans. We started to work with bigger customers and ensure that the product also works for, the builders that we set out to build for. And that has since led us to even go beyond analytics. So we recently announced our new product suite called SIM, SIM APIs, which essentially is a set of APIs that help builders build apps. So going beyond analytics into the infrastructure stack, to make people's lives easier there as well. All under our mission of making crypto data accessible though.
Yeah, can you give an example of how that'll be used? I just want to understand a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. So essentially, I mentioned in the beginning of this podcast that, the blockchain is like a right optimized database. And for analytics, you really have to do a lot of work in order to prepare the data, say off chain, in order to be read in an aggregated manner. So if you want total users of Hyperliquid over time or of Uniswap over time, you can't do a query like that to the blockchain. You have to sort of pull all the individual data points into a database and then try to create sort of this query on top of it. And it turns out that for a lot of just like the basic building blocks that you need in an application, you have to do the same thing. So if you want to show token balances inside a DeFi app or a wallet, it's actually really tricky to read that information from an EVM blockchain. If you want to show a user's activity, like activity feed, the historic transactions they've done, there are no endpoint you can hit on an Ethereum node to get that. And so the same really applies for builders. Like you need to construct this off-chain index in order to really serve your users with great UX. And that's really what we've done. So taking the knowledge that we have from analytics and translating it into, let's say, real-time infrastructure so that you can power wallets, DeFi apps, etc., with like essential data points.
Okay, so what you're essentially saying is when I go to Etherscan, put a random address, and I see that address is history. Without Etherscan or without Dune, you're saying that there is no way of seeing that history.
Correct.
Right.
And then whenever you use an app or a wallet that shows you, your 10 last interactions on chain, this app needs to either store this history themselves in their infrastructure or call a third party. They can't call the blockchain.
The blockchain, right?
Exactly. So they would want to work either with custom indexing, they would want to work with a third party like Dune and our SIM APIs or someone else to essentially power those pretty fundamental parts of on-chain UX today.
Okay, so I think this is a great segue into your pin tweet. I mean, when I started looking up, I think that was the first thing I saw. You were saying that the UX problem is it runs much deeper than the fragmented liquidity, etc., that we keep talking about. But it also matters that app get like real-time data, and that is not happening right in the current infrastructure. So how is Dune kind of changing that?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a pretty impatient person. You can ask anyone on my team. Like I care about my time being wasted, and nothing wastes your time as much as a random crypto website that takes, 10 seconds to load, 5 seconds to load. And we're so quick to jump to like EIPs and very like advanced topics to explain why UX is bad. And then nobody really pays attention to the quality of the product that they ship within the boundaries that exist. And so this was sort of like the foundational thought that I had. It's like, I want to really go to war against these slow pages. Like there's no reason they have to be slow because you just need like fundamental engineering techniques to make them fast. And that's really what our SYN APIs are trying to do, is like really provide foundational building blocks to make the calls that we see on most apps being slow, just make them fast and make them work across chains. Because the second thing that makes me really angry when I use apps today is like when I have to change the chain in the header, I have to go from Ethereum to Base to X to Y. It should just be one app. These chains are all interconnected. They all use the same wallet in the background when you send a transaction. So why not show me the data in one view? And so those are the sort of two pieces or two dimensions we focused on. It's sort of performance and having data for all the chains that your app is deployed on in like one API request.
What kind of use case does this? I'm just like thinking out loud as to, what happens after this.
For sure. Yeah. So first of all, let me backtrack a little bit. So I should have said in the beginning of the podcast that Dune's mission, is to make crypto data accessible. I think Dune is everywhere when you think about, dashboarding or user analytics. You see teams that raise entire like funding rounds with a Dune dashboard because the tool is so trusted and so prevalent in crypto. And so the next step in our mission, we always thought was like, how can we help the same teams that rely on Dune for analytics and rely on Dune to grow on that front? How can we make it easier for them to onboard even more users? And that's where we think infrastructure plays a role. And so what's next for us is really like figure out what the pain points are for our customers and keep targeting them. We also announced at DuneCon in November last year that we acquired this company, Small Excel, and we are hard at work at creating a very groundbreaking product based on the technology that we acquired from that team.
I want to get to acquisitions and, your thought process and Small Excel in a bit. But before that, I want to maybe zoom out a little and, understand from your lens as to where do you think the industry is? How has the usage of data changed over time? In terms of who the Dune customer was back in the day and who the ideal Dune customer is now. What is the mix of retail versus institutions, and anything and everything related like on that front.
For sure. Actually, I think like data is a really interesting space in crypto, more interesting in crypto than in any other sort of vertical or financial market. Retail has really, flocked to sites like Deck Screener and like these terminal based explorers where you can essentially gain a little bit of alpha to make a little bit more money recently. Like, I feel like that's where the consumer and retail part of crypto goes. They don't care as much about the product metrics on Dune as they care about, the green chart on CoinGecko or CoinMarketCap, right? So we see a few of them. Usually they don't hang out on Dune. At the same time, I think during the last, say, 2 years, we've also seen a huge influx of institutions come into crypto with products, with interest, with ETFs, as investors, as builders, as partners. And they're, on the other hand, are not just interested in, green candles and price data, but also interested in what we call like product data or like the actual usage of the on-chain products. So certainly that's been more of our focus, like leaning more towards, we've always been leaning towards the builders. And let's say there are more institutions that build today than retails are building. So we're still sort of leaning that way. But I think it's fair to say that the interest in on-chain data is just higher than ever from builders, from retail, from institutions. Yeah, it's a very bullish time in crypto, I would say.
Okay, so builder and institution, like predominantly builder is the right customer for Dune at this point.
Yeah, so that's where we always saw our role as like advancing the ecosystem, being closest to the people who actually build the applications. So we never like, there are companies out there who took a very like institutional first business model in terms of selling data to big institutions. That was never our focus. We have more of those conversations today because we have a relatively large brand and people who need crypto data, they often come to Dune. And so those conversations are certainly happening, but historically we've always been with, the people who deploy smart contracts. That's been our, bread and butter customer.
Right. I mean, I do have a question related to data providers. It's not particularly Dune, but it's like larger. Maybe it's stupid, but you let me know whether the thought process is right or not. So you look at oracles like Chainlink, Graph, etc., and I don't see how these become like sustainable in the longer run. I mean, you look at their revenues versus incentives that they have in terms of token emissions, right? And what happens when those incentives run out? I mean, people are very quick to jump and ask the same question to Bitcoin. But when it comes to their own, like application or whatever, they are conveniently look the other way. So yeah, like how does this space of on-chain data evolve, and like who do you see servicing these needs and remain profitable at the same time? Because I know that you are running companies, right? The infrastructure doesn't run itself. You will have to spend real dollars to make sure that you maintain and upgrade that infrastructure. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted to ask like what's happening there.
Yeah, so I think there are sort of, in crypto, you have this interesting mix of like people who try to solve, let's say, the business problem in front of them and or try to, let's say, innovate with incentivization, revenue, like the business model, so to speak. You have someone like the Graph who did both, right? Around the same time as Dune started, they created the subgraph and they ran a very popular hosted service for subgraphs for a long time. And then they decentralized, they created a token. Now you have this open network of indexers and fishermen and curators, etc. And so they've sort of innovated on both fronts. And I guess my personal view is that that makes your problem like n square hard because you have to solve the product problem in front of you, but you also have to solve an incredibly complicated economic problem. So we're sort of playing easy mode a little bit, maybe a little counter to the trajectory of the ecosystem who is always trying to tokenize or decentralize. We're just trying to solve the like product problem in front of us and pay for the infrastructure on the other side. We don't dabble with the other stuff. And I don't know how to predict the future for the Graph token or the Link token or any of these tokens because I just think the space is so early. I salute people who dare to innovate on both fronts. It is really tricky, but for us, it's enough on the one front.
I was about to ask you what has kept you guys from launching a token, but I think you've preemptively answered that. So we'll let that one be. But yeah, about infrastructure, like what goes on behind the scene, or when you have to launch a chain like Solana, which doesn't have EVM, like completely different architecture. So yeah, I just want to understand what kind of effort goes on behind, whether that is like on the infrastructure front or on the manpower front. Like, what is the engineering effort required?
For sure. So we integrated Solana onto Dune, I think in 2021, early 2021, and it was a major undertaking from our engineering team. So Solana is a good example because it's complicated in many dimensions. The first dimension is that its scale is unprecedented in crypto. Like there are no blockchain that produces as much data as Solana. And so every system of your stack needs to scale to, I don't have the correct multiplier, but let's just say 100 times more data than the rest. So your ingestion stack, so first of all, your RPC stack, your ingestion stack, in our case, our decoding stack, our query engine, all of these things need to be able to work on 100 times more data than, say, if you're querying Ethereum. And this was really tricky for us to tackle at once. So I remember very vividly releasing Solana support with, we could tackle all the data up until the query layer. And then our query engine at the time really struggled with the amounts of data. And over time, we solved that a little bit better too. But we were the only ones who had the entire history of Solana that you could query. Then started the other challenging dimension, which is the underlying account model in Solana and essentially programming model is entirely different from the EVM. And so the data structures and data models that made sense in the EVM world just like aren't as useful in the SVM. Like in Solana and on the SVM, you work with a lot of generated accounts and associated accounts. And so queries and patterns that just work out of the box on the EVM, they don't work when you apply them to the SVM. So having to spend a lot of time to redefine data sets so that, you can actually get value out of them was another challenging piece. And this holds true whenever there's like let's say a move-based chain or a chain that's, just any non-EVM chain. Really, if and they likely will innovate on some part of the programming model, which means that your data needs to look differently.
That's fair. In terms of only on-chain data, right? Have you guys ever thought about incorporating off-chain data too, like something like exchanges, derivatives exchanges like Deribit? Because as we have moved, derivatives have really dominated the volumes, right, on the trading side. And I'm pretty sure that on-chain applications that lean into derivatives or that will lean into derivatives in future will probably want to have like data feeds of off-chain actors as well. How do you see that part evolve?
Yeah, we haven't traditionally focused a lot on that. We did, I think, last year open up sort of data production on Dune so that you could send data to Dune via APIs. And we've seen a lot of growth in off-chain data, but maybe not derivatives data. So for instance, one of the very popular data sets on Dune for a long time was Reservoir's NFT data, which was, created off-chain and then made available on Dune. And you could really query like NFT metadata along with the on-chain volumes. We've also in the past worked with, let's say, third-party providers to provide, good token prices that include prices from centralized exchanges, but only in like aggregate form. We don't expose, like this was the price on Coinbase at time A, and this was the price on Binance at time A. That level of granularity, which I think you're asking for, hasn't really been a focus. And if I think one step further, it's probably because our main user archetype has been the builder and not the trader. So a lot of the time we've shied away from these use cases that are very like trading focused or arbitrage focused, or, like there's a lot of sites in crypto you can go to find price data. And we've just, for now at least, focused on the on-chain data.
Okay. That's fair, I guess. Yeah, I think we've spoken about reliability. Fair. In terms of like, so should we talk about competition a little bit? Where do you see like Dune in competition, and what do you think? Who do you think are the real competitors? Now that you've chosen on-chain data and, making sure that you want to lead that space, and I think you guys are already there. But yeah, like how does the landscape look like from like, what do you think of the landscape and where does Dune fit in?
Yeah. So I'd say like crypto data is like multifaceted. Like it's a very broad term. If you think about Dune's competitors from an angle of like a website where you can see user generated dashboards, there's not really that many, right? There was Flipside for a time, And apart from that, there are not really many people who are trying to do that. If you think about selling data to other businesses and institutions, we find ourselves compared to the likes of Gold Sky and Allium. On the more like institutional side, there are also other players. And then, in our developer offering, Sim, there's a whole other set of, say, competitors. So really, I think like there are many companies that are trying to operate encrypted data, which I think validates that it's an important and valuable space. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything specific I can
Okay.
help articulate.
Like we've been talking largely about the supply side of data, like if or other like user and who's the user, and but I want to get to applications and where the data is actually being generated, right? So why is it that we see so much disparity in terms of, some applications will have like great data, everything you need, and some applications will have very scattered data, something that you can't really make use of. Some of the teams are very proactive in terms of, letting their data be out there for anyone who wants to see. And a lot of times you see that there is absolutely no effort on Teams part to, do anything related to data. So how do you work with teams, and like what are the reasons because of which? I mean, one is obviously your application has no traction, so you don't really want to show that, right? But beyond that, even when the application is being used, you see that the data is difficult to find. How does that work?
I think the best teams have a data strategy almost, or use data in their strategy, either as a growth lever or as a way to, let's say, validate what they're doing. If you make data available on Dune or other sites, if you make Dune dashboards on your homepage, you're sort of telling people that everything's sort of in order. You can come here and you can inspect all the data that we produce, and that sends a signal to end users, to investors, etc. But it's not so simple. Like, in order to have good data, you also have to start like in your smart contract stack, essentially. Like, you have to keep data in line from that point on. And a lot of the times, you may just actually forget that data is important. You may not emit the right events. You may not have your function calls structured in a way that anybody can understand anything from them. And so in those cases, that's where I think like if you have data in your strategy, it's a lot easier. You can't easily fix it later. We'll come back to that. But yeah, I think it's as easy and as difficult as that. Like the best teams, they think about data from day one and think about it as valuable, something that can inform their decisions internally and externally. So
Has it happened that the team has come to you saying that, like, we didn't know what to do or how to do this, and we would love for you to help us out, and then you together with the team, you guys fixed it?
teams come to us all the time with various problems. Sometimes they just see that other teams and products have these beautiful Dune dashboards and they don't really know how to go from like a smart contract to a beautiful Dune dashboard. So sometimes they'll ask for an intro to a Dune wizard. Sometimes they'll ask us to create the dashboard. Sometimes they just have questions about decoding. Like there's an constant influx of teams that want to be represented, which I think is a really good sign for the industry, and it's obviously good for Dune as well. But yeah, like I just think back to, as an example, like the old Maker team and the DICE contract. Like that whole smart contract system was not made with data in mind. Like all of the internal variables in the smart contracts had funky names that nobody understood without having a glossary on their side. Like it didn't emit events according to the Solidity standard. It was just a complete mess. Now, I don't want to say anything bad about the Maker team because they really did a lot of work on their side internally to be data driven. Like they had an epic data team that we worked with, and they also worked a lot to like ensure that data is correctly represented. But that's an example of like, I guess, where the data was a little bit bolted on afterwards. Oh, we created all these smart contracts. Now we need to understand this data. And everybody's having a harder time because it was not part of the strategy from the beginning.
Okay, I didn't know about that. But yeah, Maker does have a pretty cool data dashboard, at least now. But yeah, didn't know behind the scenes story of that. Cool. Shall we talk a little bit about AI?
That's it.
Yeah. So, like, I don't code. Joel on my team doesn't code. Sid probably has a little bit understanding of SQL, can build one dashboard in a day or whatever, right? So, can guys like us use AI to, increase our usage of Dune? Is it possible in the distant or near future for me to go and say that, hey, I'm looking for this protocol and this is the data? Is it possible for me to get a dashboard out of that?
For sure. So you can go to Dune today and ask a question in natural language. I'd say that the experience isn't as good as what you'd hope for. Yeah. And the reason is that the number one reason is the amount of data sets that are available in Dune and on the blockchain. Like it's very difficult for an AI to effectively like traverse all the data sets. Now, I will say that in the future, I think the language of data will end up being English and not SQL. The majority of us will interact with databases all the time using English and not SQL. SQL will, exist as a layer underneath, but I think given enough time, Dune and any analytics tool will end up being driven by English. So that's sort of the general direction that I think we're headed at. But I don't know that you'll see it this year, for instance. There was just a pretty cool blog post from the Google team about their advancements in text to SQL. And it's been a while since we really did a lot of work on this. We were super excited about text to SQL last year, and we released our features and have iterated a bit on them since. But yeah, I think that's sort of the future. Like at what timeline, it's hard to say. But like everybody in Dune is relying tons on AI these days. And in our community, people either use Dune AI or they use Claude or ChatGPT to, craft their queries. So I wouldn't say like you can't go from like 0 to hero today, like 0 to dashboard, but you can go from like 0 to 80% of a query or 90% of a query. And then if you repeat that many times, you get a dashboard.
You get a dashboard. Yeah. I mean, I have done that. Like copy the code, paste it into ChatGPT, paste the error, and it does something, and repeat that again and again. Yeah. That works, but again, I mean, you're kind of not sure as to what you're getting is correct or not. But yeah.
Right.
So essentially, it is a function of someone else building text to SQL first, right? And then Dune will be up to speed.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, if you look at AI right now, it's not companies like Dune or say vertical product companies out here that are really innovating with AI. It's like either you're a foundation model team like OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, etc. These are the people who are really pushing the boundaries. And then you have some like, let's say, AI only vertical tools like Cursor, Windsurf, some of these like AI only that are pushing the boundaries. There are not many companies with AI as a feature, I'd say, that are really like, pushing a use case to completion. So I think it's fair to say that, Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, etc., will figure out text to SQL and will apply it.
Okay, so this is not related to Dune question, but back in the day when you were starting Dune, where do you think crypto would be in say 10 years or in 7 years in 2025? Are you disappointed with the expectation or are you like surprised that where we are?
I've always had a difficulty envisioning the future 10 years ahead, but in many ways, I think right now is kind of, I didn't even dream of like there being people discussing crypto in the White House or passing stablecoin legislation. When I started, I felt like almost like an underground cyberpunk hacker, who were dealing with these like tokens and crypto coins that my mother looked at me weirdly. I couldn't tell anybody what I did because it was so shady in a sense, even though Dune has, the purest intentions possible. But today it's like a legitimate industry. It has, I don't know, I could look it up, but like trillions in market cap. And so, yeah, I think we've come farther than what I thought we would.
So we've been doing some work in mergers and acquisitions. We have been involved with one internally as well. Probably in next few days we'll announce that. But want to understand your take on it. I think tech in general has had this buy versus build question. Is it cheaper, faster for me to just buy a company that will add to my existing toolkit and make my core product run faster? Or should I build that in-house, right? You guys have done an acquisition, I think last year in November.
Yep.
So yeah, I want to understand like what made you decide first that you want to acquire a company? How did you zoom in on the target? And what was the due diligence process like? And how did you guys, convert that into a transaction? We'll get into a next question later, but I want to understand leading to the acquisition before.
Yeah. So early 2022, we announced our Series B, where we raised, close to $70 million. I think with $70 million and the position that Dune had, it's only natural for us to have our ear to the ground and look at really talented teams that are doing something novel, pushing the space forward. And so part of Frederick and my role, Frederick's my co-founder, is, keeping tabs on everything that's going on, really understanding if there are teams that are building something that would change the game for Dune, so to speak. And we've been closed a couple of times or considered making moves a couple of times, but nothing really clicked until we met the Small Excel team. And we were insanely impressed with what they had built and just sort of made an attempt earlier to see what the future could be like together. It was put on hold, and then thankfully we were able to collaborate later.
Yeah, how was the due diligence process here?
Yeah. So I guess when you're looking to acquire companies, the way we reason about it is like, what is the direction we want to take Dune in? Like Dune as a company and any company really has this sort of trajectory that it's, if like the CEO goes on holiday for 3 months, whatever the company does in those 3 months, that's sort of the status quo. For Dune, it's very much, delivering Dune.com, an analytics product. Yeah, this product very well. So that's like, if left to its own devices, if Frederick and I checked out, we went to Mexico for 3 months, that's what would have happened. But that's not what we wanted Dune to be. We wanted to tilt Dune into being more of a tool for builders with more infrastructure. And we wanted the data on Dune to be more real time. So really the first part of the due diligence is like ensuring that what you're looking at meets those requirements. Will this team, will this technology, will this product pull our company in the direction we want to go, or will it pull us in a different direction? So that's like the first level. So for us, we wanted to become real time. We wanted to build for developers, and ideally we wanted to accelerate. So we wanted something that was close to market or even in the market. That was the first level of DD. And in this case, we can simply use the product. Like we could go to Sim.io and we could play with the product, which did wonders, obviously. Like you can sort of understand, build a mental model of what works, what doesn't work, where do you want to take it. And after that, you do a technical due diligence and you do a financial due diligence and all of that, right? But that only comes if you like find the spark, like this is what we want. This is what will pull us in the direction. This is, every team member we speak to is right. The product is right, all of that. So after that comes all the boring stuff really, which is like ensuring that the tech is right, the finances are the way they're supposed to be, etc.
All right. And how difficult was to integrate this team into Dune? What was like the technical and non-technical challenges you faced?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's over because they landed in January at Dune.
Ah, okay.
So it's still ongoing, I'd say. But one thing that we've done is that I think is working well is that we're building on top of their technology stack. So we've adopted a lot of their work and we're reiterating on it. So we haven't thrown it away. We're rather investing in it. I think, at least if I put myself in their shoes, that must feel like a testament to the work that they did for the past 3 years before joining Dune. The other part that we were quite adamant that like this isn't two separate teams, everybody's one team. And so we've mixed everyone in with Dune employees and tried to be very, like we have this value that's called one team, one dream, and really tried to live that. Like we didn't want two subcultures, we want one Dune culture, etc.
Okay. That's good to hear that you are actually able to make that happen, because acquisitions are messy, right? At least for the people who are incoming, like they don't understand the culture and whatever. I hope that it's working out.
It's tricky for everyone, and you just have to like put your best intentions at work every day. And yeah.
All right. So are you guys looking into like more acquisitions, or that is on pause, or it is opportunistic strictly? How does that work?
We're always open to conversations, which is more opportunistic. We're not strategically out there looking to, acquire something else at this point in time. Integrating one company into another is quite a big task, as you alluded to. So we're sort of first and foremost focused on ensuring that we reap the benefits of, the team, the technology, the product that we acquired, and that we're going to market with later in June. So yeah, that's the primary focus.
Okay, so what should people be looking forward to from Dune? What sort of future products?
Yeah, so I've mentioned a number of times here that we're releasing Sim, our developer platform. We released it last week, and this is generally like our focus at this point in time. So we launched Sim APIs now, and the next product that we're going to release in the end of June is an indexing product. So essentially, if you knew Small Excel and Sim.io, the product that we acquired, it was an excellent real-time data pipeline builder that lets you plug into the EVM in order to extract the data that you need. So it's sort of like a, shadow events meet the graph experience. And we're essentially like productizing this, making a pretty game-changing new indexing solution, essentially.
How does it differ from the current, like how indexing happens?
So essentially, the way the Sim.io or the small Excel technology works is that, remember when I said that the blockchain is a write optimized database?
Right.
So we've actually taken this write optimized database, we've forked it, and we've created a read optimized database. So we've created a fork or a version of the EVM that is actually highly scalable, parallelizable, and answers reads. So how this product works is that you as a developer, you define essentially pieces of smart contract code that goes into the EVM execution and pulls out the data that you want. Simply by like emitting an event, you can create a table in a database and an API endpoint on the other side. And this scales to like many chains, incredible backfill speeds, and really lets you go from like 0 to full application backend, minutes essentially.
All right. So, like when you said that your customer is a team that is decentralized and building an application with an intention to be decentralized, do they not expect the same out of you? And how do you guys make sure that, there is enough redundancy that if something goes down at Dune, the data is still provided to the application?
Yeah. So ultimately, I think there are two ways to build applications in crypto today: the pragmatic way and the decentralized way. The decentralized way seeks to like decentralize every aspect of the stack, including the website, all the underlying data, and the smart contracts. Now, essentially, we are the pragmatic approach where we don't think you can decentralize the foundational like data building blocks in a way that still delivers great UX to users. And you see this trade-off all the time. Like applications that are perfectly decentralized suffer in terms of the data that they can show, the response times, etc. If you have to go to IPFS in order to use an app, you know that it's going to be a lot slower than one that is hosted on a regular server. So yeah, we essentially want to present, the pragmatic approach to building applications. Your smart contracts are decentralized. They're on a blockchain. They're on multiple blockchains. You can rebuild the pipelines from scratch on Sim or on any other tool if you so want to, because the data is public. But the infrastructure that you build on, which is Sim, is proprietary and fully managed. And I think that reflects the reality of, the best crypto apps today. If you think about Uniswap, Polymarket, and any app you love to use in crypto, it walks the edge between like decentralization and pragmatism pretty well and errs to the size of pragmatic choices.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Yeah. All right, Mats. Thanks a lot. This has been a blast. Thank you for spending time with me.
Thanks for having it. It's lovely.
All right. What do you think of that? Let us know in the comments. If you liked it, please leave likes, please subscribe. It will help us bring in more guests like this.